Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for joining me this afternoon. Hope you're keeping well. I'm really excited to be hosting this first ever webinar that Cheeky Little Careers is doing in collaboration with Barbary SQE Prep. For those of you who aren't familiar with Barbary, it is a really well-regarded legal education provider specialising in getting candidates through the US bar examinations. And then more recently, they are moving into the solicitors qualification exam space. And there are a range of flexible options already available for enrolment onto the first SQE exam. And more information can be found about this through the links in the resource list. If you do have any questions about Barbary or about the SQE and about the prep courses that they'll be launching, then do use the Q&A facility. I'll be encouraging you to ask questions throughout, both on the topic that we're going to be discussing during the sort of next hour, but also on any other sort of topics that you have a burning desire to find out more about. So that's Barbary. Let me now tell you a little bit about myself. So if you don't already know me or haven't seen sort of my social media sort of profile, I'm very active on LinkedIn. I'm a former lawyer. I studied law at Warwick University and then trained at Linklaters and then qualified into their corporate practice. I'm quite old. So I started my training contract in 1997 and qualified in 99, just at the height of the dot-com boom. Those of you who are familiar, you may know about the website lastminute.com. So we're now in this sort of brand new world that we live in where technology, encompasses everything we do. That way back then, organisations like lastminute.com were startups and they were just entering the sort of online sphere. I'll tell you a bit more about how sort of technology has shaped my training contract and how it might impact the training contracts for those of you who are yet to commence your journey later, because that's really what this presentation is all about. So what did I end up doing? I left law at about 3 years PQE because going back, I've always had a real passion for writing, and I'm quite an inquisitive character, I guess. So I ended up following an alternative career path and left law to become a journalist and spent many, many years working on The Lawyer magazine and launched their student website, lawyertobe.com, which I don't think exists in the same capacity as it does now, as it did then. But it was great from my perspective because it got me fully immersed into all things careers related. So it felt really natural for me to sort of move on from journalism and to try my hand at legal recruitment. I spent about a year in a recruitment agency before I realised actually it's not for me. What I really like isn't the process of circulating candidate CVs. It's more about talking to individuals about their career sort of choices, goals and aspirations. And that was really the sort of genesis for my career coaching and business skills consultancy. And then most recently, because I get really bored quickly, and I've always got to have a new project on the go, I co-founded a careers and lifestyle website called Cheeky Little Careers. If you haven't already logged on, then please do have a look. It's already we only launched it in June 2020, so we're in our sort of fourth month, and it's already bursting at the seams with content, which really should appeal to everyone from aspiring lawyers through to junior to mid-level business professionals, because the focus isn't just about how to get a training contract. It's, you've arrived, you're now in your sort of firm as a trainee, but what do you need to do now to fully succeed and flourish so that you can go on to enjoy fulfilling careers as solicitors or barristers. Now, as I've already hinted, the legal market has changed beyond recognition since I was a lawyer. But as I'm about to reveal, despite, our obsession with technology and social media and, everyone thinking that they need to start coding, much has really remained the same. And I think the fundamental job of a lawyer is pretty much what it used to be like when I was working in the city. And I'll come on to that sort of as I go along. But so, yes, of course, it's really important to become a little bit more sort of tech savvy. But I think, as I'm about to reveal, that there are lots of other qualities and attributes that law firms look for in their future recruits. And I'm going to share with you this afternoon what I think makes for, a really strong candidate and what you can be doing to potentially sort of bolster your CVs, especially in this challenging climate where it's not so easy to go off and play sports or to go travelling, etc. And, and what about if you don't have those opportunities to do that, what can you be doing as an alternative way to sort of hone those skills? Because I can tell you now, although I'm sure lots of you listening in are extremely capable and talented, you're not the finished products. And therefore, the long list of skills that law firms tend to have on their website saying these are the requirements for you to get into our firm, I would be shocked and stunned if all of you felt that you had all those skills. So really, from my perspective, it's about playing to your strengths, working out where the gaps are and what you can be doing to close that gap and to create a CV that's going to really wow graduate recruiters. As I said, I want to encourage you to ask as many questions as you want, so feel free to send them in. I've got Anna, who works for Barbary, and she's going to be monitoring the Q&A and is also at hand to answer the questions about Barbary as well. So let's crack on, shall we? So let me go into a bit more detail about sort of what's changed. Look, I've got a confession to make. I'm not the most technologically adept person in this sort of webinar, okay? I don't know how to code. I just about have a vague idea of what AI is, okay? Enough to run this presentation and to have the credibility for you to sort of think, yeah, Husnara knows what she's talking about, right? But I think that I've had to retrain my brain to really react to what's going on around us. And I think that the sort of technological explosion that I mentioned in this first bullet point and the fact that robots are taking over, there is obviously quite a lot of truth in that. And when I look at the content that law firms are producing, there's every day there's another law firm announcing some kind of deal with regard to sort of technology or working for startups, etc. Okay, but will there still be a need for lawyers? I think there will be, but I think the way they're deployed is going to change, which I'll come on to. But it's not just the technology, I think, that is impacting the shape of, or the current shape of the legal market. The legal sector is, I think, more competitive than it has been ever before, because the way law firms operate has changed. Historically, back in the 1990s, when I was an aspiring lawyer, it was very much the top 100 law firms. You tended to want to, if you were sort of an aspiring city lawyer, lots of students would sort of gun for the Magic Circle firms, and then you've got the Silver Circle didn't exist, and some of the firms that did exist don't even exist anymore. And the US firms that now also dominate quite a big chunk of the London legal market were non-existent. They hadn't crossed the Atlantic to, poke their flag on British soil, so to speak. Okay. So who are the new kids on the block? You've got the accountancy practices that are now sort of growing their legal arms. You've got these so-called virtual law firms, where they almost operate on a sort of chambers-like model, whereby you don't have one big building where everyone is housed. You just share some of the common resources like marketing and business development, and even, frankly, document sort of production. Okay. And then you've got the boutiques, You may have heard of the phrase litigation boutique. These are firms that decided to set up shop in the London market because some of the really large, high-profile commercial law firms would refuse to sue banks because they were worried that then banks would never give them any work. So you've got to decide which side of the fence you're sat on. So there's been a real explosion in boutiques, whether that's in litigation, in IP, sports law, etc. And some of this has been to do with the way law firms charge out for the work they do. Historically, it was always done on an hourly basis. Now, more firms are offering fixed fees so that it doesn't matter how long it takes a trainee, a partner, and an associate to finish the piece of work. The client just pays the set amount. Okay, then you've got hybrid arrangements, etc. But that's obviously going to impact the way law firms run themselves as businesses. And then another key change, I guess, is that historically law firms have always been partnerships, okay, which is why we call them law firms and not companies. Okay. That said, you'll have seen that there are a few firms that have decided, actually, we're going to go public. And that essentially means that they're going to list themselves on the stock exchange, meaning that they become corporate entities with shareholders that could include members of the public or pension funds. And as you can imagine, the business model changes. So again, the way that firm will be run on a day-to-day basis will change. Okay, so it's not just about the technology, and it's worth your while having a proper read around some of the other sort of challenges and opportunities that exist for law firms in this climate, okay? Especially in the context of an economic downturn, the pandemic, and of course, Brexit. The final bullet point I wanted to make about the way law firms are sort of organised, I guess, is the people. Law firms are now, interestingly, made up of multiple generations. Okay, you've heard of the phrases like Gen X, Millennials, Gen Z, etc. When I was a trainee and then an associate at Linklaters, it was really a combination of probably Gen X's and Millennials, and then the odd baby boomer with a real sort of like grey-haired sort of men. Okay, but what's happening is that with three or four different generations, working together in the same building, or albeit remotely at the moment, they have different working styles, goals, ambitions, priorities. I know now that if I talk to a junior lawyer or a trainee, not all of them want to become a partner. They use law as a platform to potentially set up their own business at sometime in the future. Whereas for me, my generation, all of us came to city law firms to become partners. So that's why the way law firms manage staff and the relationships they have with their up-and-coming lawyers has really had to adapt to make way for the fact that your generation cares more about the environment and the impact that their employer might be having on climate change. Your generation cares more about work-life balance and mental well-being. So all of those factors have, I think, heavily influenced the sort of culture that's prevailing within commercial law firms. And that, again, is going to really determine what sort of individuals are likely to flourish in that environment. And as I'm going to discuss towards the end of this session, that for me, yes, technology is really important, but those key soft skills and people skills are, I think, what will really differentiate aspiring lawyers from robots and obviously some of the competition. I'll just have a look in the Q&A just to see if there are any questions. Nothing yet, so that's fine. We'll crack on. So I've spent the past 5 minutes talking about the change that's sort of taken place in the past sort of 20-odd years since I was a trainee in the city. But as I've already alluded to, yes, that it is unrecognisable. And when I wander around, or when I've wandered around the square mile, it's looked remarkably different to when I was there. Even if you just look at the physical landscape with more skyscrapers being launched, the Gherkin didn't exist, the cheese grater. In fact, I don't think that the Shard obviously wasn't around either. So, but what's quite interesting is that if you park all those changes to one side and then pause and really think about what's happened, you'll realise quite quickly that in fact, perhaps it's not that different after all. Lawyering, as I say in this slide, is still, part of the services sector, okay? That means that lawyers exist to serve their clients, okay? The client is king. And because of some of the sort of economic factors that we've talked about, particularly in this climate with regard to the pandemic and the fact that we are now in an economic downturn, means that clients are more demanding than ever before. And interestingly enough, it's not just so much to do with how their lawyers, how much their lawyers charge. Clients are even, sticking their mitts into areas like diversity and inclusion, and they'll want firms to explain, why is their partnership predominantly made up of white men, or they might want stats on a firm's credentials when it comes to corporate social responsibility and the climate. So I think in-house lawyers just have a bit more of their voices are louder. And that's probably partly to do with the legal press giving them a lot of attention, and also because of social media. Now, one skill that, frankly, is often neglected because it doesn't sound remotely sexy is attention to detail. And as far as I'm concerned, analytical skills and excellent attention to detail are, to me, remain the most essential skill for lawyers. Because fundamentally, clients come to you because they think that, because of your amazing academic achievements, you have that level of intellect whereby you can decipher really complex information and then process it and present it in a way that will make more sense to them. So, you're the fixer, you're the problem solver. So that's why you need to, no matter whatever other reasons you have to pursue a career as a lawyer, ultimately you do need to have an interest in the law and be, really at ease flicking through lengthy documents that are often, mind-bogglingly complicated, and get a real buzz from doing that. And then in terms of clumsy mistakes, it's, I think, one of the quickest ways for senior colleagues to lose confidence in you. And how can you talk about attention to detail in your applications? Well, I don't think you need to mention it. I think attention to detail is tested in the way you present your application forms. So, the people who are going to be doing the initial sort of review of your application forms or CVs will spot those pesky errors really quickly. And sadly, that might mean a make or break situation for you with regard to securing that interview. So, it's something that you don't need to talk about actively, but certainly worth thinking about when you're completing documents and making sure that you don't forget vital attachments, for example. And then I guess the other thing that's worth mentioning is that, all talk is now on well-being, work-life balance, flexible working, especially in this climate where, most employers are now still operating a work-from-home policy because of the pandemic. But it's worth highlighting again, for those of you who are undecided about what type of lawyer you want to become, that life in commercial law firms especially can be a bit volatile. Okay, the hours can be a bit unpredictable, especially for transactional, so that's banking and finance, for example, where you might, your work will come in peaks and troughs. You'll have a couple of down days and then suddenly it all just kicks off and becomes really busy. And you've got to seriously ask yourself, is that the lifestyle that you want, or do you want more steady hours? And that, I think, is a key sort of differentiator between the different types of firms that you might want to target when you get to the application stage. So let's talk about technology, because that's what most of you will be expecting me to discuss. Okay, as I said, I'm no expert, but what I do know is that AI, or artificial intelligence, can essentially mimic human behaviour, and it can carry out tasks and solve problems that, historically we thought that only humans can do. And that is a game changer, because it's one thing robots operating on a conveyor belt and doing the same task on a sort of repeat basis. But the minute that robots can start thinking like humans, we think we need to sit up and pay attention. Okay. And where AI has been used the most in recent years by law firms is on the really sort of document heavy type tasks, such as due diligence. For those of you who don't know what that is, that's essentially the analogy I use to explain that is, imagine you're buying a car. Okay, due diligence when buying a car will include the really basics, checking the logbook to make sure that the person selling it actually owns the car, right? Looking under the bonnet to make sure that there aren't any obvious leaks, checking the tyres. Okay, so it's essentially buyer beware, making sure that what is being sold to you is what you're paying for, and that therefore the price you've agreed is appropriate. Okay, in the context of major corporate transactions, that would have historically involved, and certainly when I was a lawyer, would have involved reviewing thousands and thousands and thousands of hard copy documents. Okay, whereas now it's all done, a lot of it is done electronically. And essentially what this technology is able to do is pick out keywords in documents. So for example, one keyword could be change of control. And the reason why change of control is really important in due diligence is that certain contracts can become void in the event that the ownership structure of a business changes. You might put in a keyword which is employment tribunal, because if you are about to buy a business that is facing a massive claim from a former employer for unfair dismissal or sex discrimination, etc., you want to really be aware of that, because you may want to ask for a price reduction, which represents a value of what the claim might be in the event the employee or former employee is successful. So that's what's great from a junior lawyer's perspective, is that these very, very document-heavy roles or jobs is essentially bread and butter work for junior lawyers. And I'm going to be honest with you, it can be mind-numbingly boring. And you spend hours, browsing these documents, and you don't see lights for several days in a row. So if that's been sort of commoditized and made electronic, then the great news is that it'll free junior lawyers and trainees up to do more exciting stuff. So that's on the sort of like document heavy stuff, but computers are getting more and more clever. Okay, and this is where decision making by computers can really impact the way lawyers work on a day-to-day basis. So what some firms have done is that they're using AI and machine learning as tools to help clients involved in a potential dispute to evaluate whether there is actually any merit in pursuing the claim, or to potentially decide next steps. Because again, this is a commercial awareness point. If you are representing a client who has a bit of a is upset with a supplier, and they've decided that they want to sue, the first thing you need to ask yourselves is, based on all the information we've got in front of us, is it actually worth pursuing the claim, or do you just agree a sort of settlement, which is, because, and what this technology can do, and I believe Herbert Smith has been really pioneering this, is they can decide not only whether it's worth pursuing the claim based on, algorithms that review what's happened in similar cases in the past, but technology is also used to determine pricing structure and how much a law firm should charge their clients. So it's really not just about doc review anymore. It's everything from taking an instruction from a client through to strategizing over a piece of contentious work. So the next question you're going to be asking, and especially based on all the horror stories that you'll no doubt see, popping up in your social media feeds, is where does that leave you as someone who is an aspiring lawyer and looking to enter the profession for the first time? Okay. So as I've already touched upon, with low costs and low margin work being sort of handed over to robots or to technology sort of experts, it can be a positive development, because it means that you'll get to do more sort of complex work and you'll get more client contact. Okay. As I've already highlighted, I don't think you need to necessarily go off and become experts in coding. It's interesting because I posted an article from the Cheeky Little Careers website on this topic on LinkedIn, and someone commented saying that forget coding and understanding algorithms. Frankly, a basic understanding of Excel is what you really need. So I think it's important to highlight that you shouldn't put too much emphasis on it. It's more about, I think, general awareness. And if you like learning and you find the idea of going off and doing a coding course really exciting, then of course you should do it. Because I'm a huge advocate for sort of investing in self-learning and professional development. And if you can afford to do it, and certainly it's something that could, add some bells and whistles to your CV and give you a bit of an edge, especially because other more sort of common activities that students get up to are more challenging in this climate, then it's a great thing to be doing. But what I'm saying is that if you can't get your head around it, please don't freak out. And also, given how rapidly technology is advancing, it wouldn't surprise me in the slightest if some of what we're learning today doesn't even exist in 2 years' time. Because don't forget, law firms hire so far in advance that some of you won't be starting your training contracts for 2 or 3 years. So the world will probably look different, and much of what I'm saying, sadly, but truthfully, might be out of date. The flip side to my first bullet point about the opportunities afforded to trainees and junior lawyers through the mundane stuff being handed over to robots is that I think, sadly, it will inevitably result in some firms deciding that they don't need as many trainees. So that in turn might mean, if numbers wanting to pursue careers in law remain constant, that then competition becomes more fierce. But I think that the demise of lawyers was already meant to have happened, and the fact that it hasn't makes me wonder whether it's going to be as rapid or not. But look, if you're interested in finding out more about this topic, then there's tons of commentary out there on the internet for you to go and explore in your own time. I think Richard Susskind is probably the most sort of well-known commentator on this topic, and I certainly would recommend that you read some of his content. He's, again, written various books and always been quoted in blogs and articles published in the legal press. So let's return to the old school then. Let's park technology to one side and talk about some of the other skills, I think, that are just as important as knowing your algorithms, okay? So first and foremost, as I've hinted already, legal knowledge, okay? So that means being able to navigate your way around statutes, legislation, is really, really important, okay? And if you don't get terribly excited by that, then it's worth asking yourself, firstly, do you want to use your law degree to pursue a career as a lawyer? Because plenty of law graduates don't end up becoming solicitors or barristers. Or do you, it also could determine what type of lawyer you want to be. So, for example, as a transactional lawyer specialising in corporate work, I deliberately chose that because I can't say that I get terribly excited about research tasks. And I know that as a corporate lawyer, you tend to be more of a transaction manager than a sort of bookworm who will have your head buried in statutes. Okay, so not loving law doesn't mean it's a deal breaker, but it might determine, or certainly I would encourage you to think about what areas of law you might want to specialise in going forward, and therefore what type of firms you should be targeting when putting together your shortlist of potential employers that you're going to submit applications to. And look, the long and short of it is that what your clients don't want you to do is to pull together a lengthy memo explaining the law. They don't want you to tell them, what does this piece of law actually mean in plain English? What they want is either a solution or someone saying to them that their idea is illegal. Okay, so clients really dislike lawyers who sit on the fence. And you'll hear this phrase being mentioned again and again, that clients want lawyers who are commercially savvy, who are solution focused. And what that essentially means is that clients want their lawyers to tell them what they can or can't do, but mostly what they can do, because what clients don't want is their lawyers to keep blocking potential progress within a business because the lawyers keep saying no. What they want is, no, you can't do that, but have you thought about that? Okay. And by the way, contrary to what I thought when I was at your stage, you certainly don't need to memorize large chunks of legislation to flourish as a lawyer. It's really more about knowing where to look for answers. Of course, once you choose your specialism, you'll be expected to have, a basic understanding of the law that relates to that area. But anything more complex, the key isn't knowing the answers off the top of your head, it's knowing where to look for it. So that means coming up with processes that you may work out for yourself with help from senior colleagues on how to get your head around documents that can be quite long. Because for me, one thing that I hadn't cottoned on to when I was a student and when I was deciding whether to be a lawyer or not, what sort of lawyer I wanted to be, because I simply just wasn't that discerning. But despite spending time in 2 Magic Circle firms doing vacation schemes, it didn't occur to me for 1 second that being a lawyer is quite document heavy. And that's probably one of the reasons why I didn't stick with it in the end, because I just found that for me, spending time in front of lengthy documents was just not terribly exciting. But again, it's a personal choice, okay? So we've talked about legal knowledge. So that's the sort of technical nous. The next point is core business skills. And often they overlap with my third bullet point, which is soft skills or people. But I've deliberately split them because I think that core business skills are the ones that you should be working on right now, and are the ones that I think firms are more likely to test you on quite explicitly when you're completing application forms and during interviews. And you've probably heard of the phrase competency-based interviews and strengths-based interviews. And the themes that those types of interviews typically focus on are those core business skills. So there I've listed commercial awareness or business acumen. By the way, if you don't know, I will be doing a separate presentation on commercial awareness in a couple of weeks' time. So if you haven't already signed up for that, then please do. Writing and drafting. So that's not just, the really lengthy contracts and legal documents, but it can be as simple as how to address an email and how to sign it off. Okay. Verbal communication, again, it's not about being able to become a strong public speaker, because don't forget, especially for those of you who are pursuing the solicitor's route rather than the bar, that you're not expected to do advocacy in the same way that a barrister would be doing. But it's really more about when you speak to clients that you present yourself in a way that sort of oozes confidence and gravitas. And then organising and time management, as I've already said, one thing that hasn't changed when it comes to working as a lawyer is that it's long hours. It's not a 9-to-5 job, it's a vocation. That means you need to manage your time really carefully, and you obviously need to sort of be organised to manage that time in a way that's really effective. But don't forget, it's not about hours worked. As far as I'm concerned, it's more about being productive. Okay, and I think that's another sort of change that I've noticed within the professions, not just law, but beyond that, which is no longer is it about who's worked the longest hours, but it's about how productive have you been. And then we've talked about IT and tech skills. And frankly, if nothing else, if you've got a basic, really strong grasp of Excel and PowerPoint so that you can put together really good presentations, and then obviously understanding a little bit about social media, then I think that's a pretty good start. So the reason I've separated soft skills, and really for me that's about people and interpersonal skills, is because you won't necessarily be tested on these in the same way as your commercial awareness or your time management, but it's certainly something that interviewers, especially during assessment days, will be observing you on. And for me, those are the skills that people often neglect because people think, well, I'm already really confident, I'm already really popular, so why do I need to work on how to build relationships? But as I'm about to reveal, this to me is where you can separate yourselves from your contemporaries. So how do you make yourself come across as more human? Because really, what's going to the survival, frankly, of the lawyer race, I think, is that lawyers need to start thinking about how they can add value in a way that robots can't. And from my perspective, that's really about being human. And that means, a really, really strong focus on some of the following, okay? For number one has to be relationship building and networking, okay? Connected to that is being curious and then having a creative approach to problem solving. So as I mentioned earlier, if you were about to tell your client they can't do something, how impressive would it be to the client if you said, but you could do it that way instead? And the next point is keeping an open mind and not being afraid to step outside of your comfort zone. I think lawyers for so many years now have been branded as people who are quite risk averse, they're quite conservative, they don't typically think outside the box, and what they're looking for is faults and potential red flags rather than opportunities. So, it's having that sort of positive go and get it mindset rather than the no person, okay? And I think, this will come through emotional development as we all grow older, which is really being in the driving seat and taking ownership for the work that you do. And one thing that I know I've noticed when I speak to trainees, for example, is they talk about, I want more responsibility, but then they don't really know what that means. For me, more responsibility means that you can be given a piece of work and you can run with it on your own. So you basically manage that work stream. It's quite a discrete piece of work, but beyond, and the person delegating to you will have confidence in your ability to manage that piece of work and so come back to the supervisor with appropriate questions, and be honest that if they get stuck. But beyond that, it's also being able to connect that discrete piece of work to the bigger picture. Because I found when I was working on these really mega multi-million pound, sometimes multi-billion pound deals, I'd be given a piece of work, but I would have absolutely no idea how it connects to the deal. And often you're not told that because there's not time for the senior lawyers to sit down with you and explain that. So again, taking ownership means taking time out of your own schedule to develop a deeper understanding of a piece of work that the team that you're working with is involved in. And then for me, this is like my, this is really what I exist for, which is to encourage all the new generations of professionals coming through the ranks to just be a little bit more interested and proactive in your own development, okay, and the way you plan your career, rather than leaving things to chance and just hoping that everything will land on the plate, because it doesn't. I can tell you that from personal experience, and also from the experiences of the sort of scores of lawyers I speak to on a pretty regular basis about sort of career planning, career progression, career mishaps, etc. So I want to talk in more detail about relationship building and networking, because that's really what being human is about, okay? Contrary to what I thought, it's not a popularity contest, okay? And I think that this is something that, the millennials, Gen Zs are really guilty of, because everything is about social media. It's about, Insta, it's about Snapchat, it's about TikTok, etc., and how many followers you can get. And for me, it's more about developing meaningful relationships with a select group of people, okay? And that you really nurture and cultivate those relationships so that as you grow and you progress through your careers, those relationships will evolve. And it's got to be a two-way thing, okay? I know it sounds a little bit crass that, when you think about developing a relationship with someone, you ask yourself, what's in it for me? It's equally important to ask yourself, what's in it for them, okay? And if there is that degree of reciprocation, then, and both sides benefit from that relationship, then I think that will put you in a pretty good position for using that network for gain in your profession. And it's also perfectly reasonable, I think, to create some degree of separation between, friends, so your, people who would take a bullet for you, through to your sort of professional network. But really, I think that from my perspective, it's about quality and not quantity. And how do you go about starting those relationships? Because, again, networking, I thought, used to be all about going to events and spending, time introducing people to myself and focusing so much on impressing others that I would not pause and let the other person speak. So it just became about me, okay? And that can leave a pretty bitter taste in people's mouths. And, so think about how you come across, because I think people are more likely to warm to you if you make them feel good about themselves. And that means sometimes shining the torch on them and asking them questions, okay? And, that does mean asking those key open questions like how, what, and avoiding being overly intrusive. And I can promise you that if you spend 5 to 10 minutes preparing for every encounter you're having, then you'll get far more from a networking coffee or conversation than if you just go in and just have a general chat. Because yes, you might feel good about yourself and they might feel good about themselves, but I can guarantee that you'll walk away thinking, damn it, why did I not get them to introduce me to X? And then the hardest thing I think about networking is that anyone can, start growing their LinkedIn network and have, hundreds of people on that list. But don't forget, following up is so important, and then staying in touch, because otherwise these people will just become a number and not an individual who could, potentially act as a referee for you in the future, who could become a mentor, who could just be someone to bounce ideas off because you've got a career dilemma that needs addressing, or they just can just share some advice based on their own personal experiences. So networking, especially at your level, isn't about going around with a begging bowl asking people for jobs. It's more about using those interactions as an opportunity to learn and discover. Then another, again, if you are thinking, how do I make sure that I stand out from the robots? Then really, as you build your network, what you want to be asking yourself is, what do I want my network to know me for? Because we all have brands, you know, in the same way that we associate brands with, you know, quality or a logo or a value. Our brands are essentially, what do people say about us when we're not in the room? Okay. And for me, the brand has to be two parts. Firstly, it's those key sort of qualities that you want people to really remember you for, whether that's being likable or being credible or knowledgeable, okay, or a good listener, which I think is really important when it comes to relationship building. Then, so that's part one. Okay, so what are the key qualities that you want people to associate with you? Then the second bit is, what do you want to be known for? Okay, and that's especially important as you enter the professions, perhaps not so much now, but when you start your training contracts, because let me use myself as an example. I've decided that for me, my business plan is to build a careers website with a real focus on personal growth, business skills training, and also diversity. So what I'm doing now is commenting on content on social media about that, and also writing my own content. Okay, so I'm not in any way suggesting that you should all decide a topic that you want to become famous for and then start blogging, but it's more about maybe at this stage developing a bit more of an interest in it so that you've got something interesting to say back. I've just got a quick question, so let's see. So it says, how can law firm applicants demonstrate that they're embracing technology? What I'll do is I'll park that whilst I've got literally one more slide. So why don't I just finish and then we'll come to that. And if you have any other questions, then please, now's a really good chance to submit them, because we will have 10 minutes at the end. So the final point I wanted to make about all of this, so hopefully I've given you plenty of food for thought in terms of skills, both in terms of the knowledge of technology through to soft skills, and then obviously those core skills like time management, teamwork, attention to detail, research, etc., etc. Okay, so I think that it's worth your while sitting down and writing a list of skills that law firms typically look for based on my slides and what law firms are saying on their graduate recruitment literature, and then really being quite honest with yourself, thinking, okay, I'm good at this, not so good at that. That I really do excel in. And then hopefully you'll identify where, you know, where the sort of weaker links are in that chain. Okay. And then it's worth thinking about, and granted, you have to be a lot more creative in this climate, about activities you can get involved in to help close that gap. But it could be, frankly, reading a book. It doesn't have to be attending an event or traveling the world, because you know, our lives are really limited at the moment in terms of what we can achieve. It could be listening to a webinar. So it doesn't have to involve you leaving your desk, which is a great thing, okay? And it certainly does not have to relate to law, okay? It can be and it doesn't have to be paid work. It can be volunteering. It can be pursued through a hobby. And if it's a hobby that you know you're not able to partake in at the moment, think about what new hobbies you could be involved in. But enjoy it though, because I do feel sad when I think that people get involved in certain activities because they feel that it's required of them. Everything I did to develop my skill set has been activities that I've thoroughly enjoyed and have helped me to just become a bit more all-rounded. And then I promise you, I know this sounds so elementary, but it really is worthwhile keeping a log from day one as to what you've been involved in, because it will make filling in those application forms so much easier. because memory does get the better of us, especially at the moment when everything feels like a massive blur. And I feel that, I can't remember what I'm doing tomorrow, let alone what I did 2 days ago, sort of thing. So keep a logbook. And I think that it also helps with confidence building, because when you actually sit down and write down all the things you've been involved in and things that you've done, no matter how, minor they might feel, it can be a really sort of like great exercise to give yourself a degree of reassurance that actually you're on track. And it means that those negative thought patterns that sometimes come up, thinking I can't do this or this is beyond my reach, will hopefully have a sort of mitigating effect on that. So that's what I was going to sort of cover on my slide. So let's go to questions. We'll pick up on the one that's already come in, which is the question about how can you demonstrate that you are embracing technology on training contract applications or pupillage applications, I guess. I think that, as I've said, it doesn't have to involve enrolling on a coding course. It can be really developing a general awareness on how technology is shaping the way law firms operate their business, okay? And the way you develop that initial knowledge will be through listening to talks like this. Lots of law firms are doing similar presentations, but more specific to what they're doing as organisations to help their clients. Follow law firms on their social media feeds, etc., etc. And then the way you highlight that in an application form, it could be in the context of one of the questions they might ask you, which could be, what challenges and opportunities do you think law firms are facing in this climate? And that's your cue to talk about technology and the knowledge you've developed about how technology is helping law firms, but also potentially acting as an impediment. Okay. Or it could be even more specific, because let's say you want to apply to Herbert Smith, I've already mentioned to you that they have developed this in-house software to, it's called the decision-making tree. So I think a really strong applicant who understands the importance of technology could potentially make reference to that, saying that as part of my research, I noticed that, Herbert Smith Freehills is really pioneering the lead on technology and how it can really put law firms at an advantage. So that's how you do it. It's not through one particular thing, it's through a combination of things. But for me, if you don't have that initial awareness, then it's going to be difficult for you to plough through the tons of information that's just pushed out on social media to know what to read and what to just ignore. Okay, so let's go for another question. Any practical tips for approaching and building relationships with people in your network? Yes, lots actually. Firstly, the way to decide who to prioritise is ask yourself, in this stage in your life, who would be useful to know and how can they help you? Okay, it can be, as I said, because they could provide a reference, they could share some insight into an area of law, or potentially living in a city if you're looking at training contracts outside of London. And then when you approach them, I think the most important points to consider are the following. Okay, firstly, ask yourself this question. Based on the quality of your relationship with this individual, i.e. how well have you known them? So how long have you known them for and how well do you know them? And how senior are they? Is what I'm about to ask them appropriate or reasonable? Okay, and you can take quite a liberal, laissez-faire interpretation of appropriate, because I do think that a bit of audacity is quite important, because you've got to be brave and just put yourself out there. And then the next thing I think is that it's worth asking, is this person more likely to respond to a general request for help, which sounds a bit vague and therefore could potentially put someone off, and it certainly puts me off? Or could you just ask them a really specific question, which is, I'm right in the throes of making training contract applications. I'm, I've seen that you've posted lots of comment on LinkedIn recently about, sharing tips on how to, smash those applications. Could we set up a 15-minute call just for me to run a few questions by you? And can you see, so it's specific. You've said how long you want that person for, and then it's also worth creating some sort of timeline, because if you make a very broad generic approach with no sort of timeline, then the risk is that you might not hear back from the person, or they might just forget to reply because they think that there's no urgency, sort of thing. And the main thing is, as I said, audacity is not a bad thing. Just put yourself out there, and the worst that's going to happen is that your message just gets ignored or you just get fobbed off. But what you do is develop a thick skin and just move on and ask, find out the next person. And then the way to end networking conversations, I think, is asking really politely, it's been fantastic talking to you. I would love to stay in contact. Perhaps I can, touch base with you in a few months just to let you know how I'm getting on. So give them a reason as to why you're going to get in contact with them. And then the other way to end a conversation could be, it's been great getting to know you. If you were me, who else should I be speaking to? And rather than saying, can you put me in contact with someone, the risk is that they'll say no, or they can't. But if you say who, they might at the very least give you some names, but ideally they'll then offer to put you in contact with that individual. I hope that helps. So let's move on to the next question. Okay, so what kind of skills do you think students can gain from a virtual internship? And do you think they're worth mentioning in an application when so many people have also done it? Yes, because if you don't, then it looks like you haven't done one. And given that there are so many to choose from, it will just look odd that you've not done one if you don't mention it, because the assumption will be you haven't. And they might think, hang on a minute, that's a bit lazy. Why not? So put simply, yes, mention them. Similarly, if there are any webinars that you've done that are a little bit quirky or a bit unusual. But again, it's talking intelligently about what your takeaway is from that, what you've learnt, but really focusing on some of the skills that we've talked about. And when talking about those skills, one of the rookie errors that I see that happens most frequently is that students in their application forms use quite broad brush generic examples when answering these competency style questions. So think about sort of, something that's a little bit more sort of off-piste, I guess. It's got to be something really quite specific to you, because that's how you tailor application forms so that you stand out from the competition. We've got another couple of minutes left, so I could do one more question if anyone has anything else.
If no one has any, Husnara, may I jump in and ask you one? A little bit of, yes, of the end of this one, actually. Given that there's so many events, both networking as well as any type of work experiences done in the virtual space, how does one go about demonstrating those skills in a virtual environment?
I think that it depends on the format of the virtual event. I think first and foremost, if you research what the format of the event is going to be like, then you'll have a better idea of what preparation you should be doing in advance. So if a virtual event involves a case study, for example, then that's obviously, a great way to demonstrate team working skills, because you can still use these virtual platforms to work as a team. And in a way, it requires an extra degree of discipline, because anyone who's done these virtual events will know that they're not, because they're video conference facilities, it's really off-putting when everyone starts speaking at the same time, because the system just goes into meltdown. So think about whether you want to, you could offer to become the chair. So it's, again, thinking, okay, what could I do to get in first? And if you don't want to do that, encouraging other people to be involved and giving them an opportunity to speak, that's a really easy thing you could be doing in a case study. Or it could be offering to be the note keeper, because one great thing about being the note keeper is you always get an opportunity to speak Okay. And then if it's a networking event where you've got one-to-one sort of opportunities to chat to people, then again, doing some preparation about on the background of the person who you're going to be meeting, or at the very least, if you don't know who the individual will be, the organisation, then that will make it so much easier to ask those initial icebreaker questions, because the questions you ask often, reflect how that person is going to see you as a candidate. Because if someone asks really basic questions to which you could have easily found the answers to on a law firm's website, the person you've met, who probably is taking notes on you, will probably just write you off as someone who, frankly, didn't really show that much interest and, blagged it. So preparation, I think, is key. And also don't feel pressurized into doing every event. Think about what mix of events you could be doing. Obviously, prioritize events from law firms that you're potentially interested in applying to. Get involved in a mix of events, some that actually have a degree of interactivity so that you can do some exercises together, role play or whatever. And then some that involve some face-to-face networking. By that, I mean, obviously, video networking on a one-to-one basis. And then, well done for listening in on presentations like this, because I think non-employer presentations are also equally helpful, because you get a bit more of an objective overview of the market, because I think that some employer talks can be a little bit, they're in sell mode, so they can sometimes, sugarcoat what it's really like to be a lawyer. Does that answer your question, Anna?
Yes, it does. Thank you so much. Thank you. And there were very good questions submitted as well. So we're coming to the end of it. But just to let everybody know that in the resource list, you can find the link to Cheeky Little Careers and also to the Barbary website. And do check out the upcoming events that Husnara is organizing as part of this business skills series. The next of which she mentioned is an advanced commercial awareness, and that will be on the 12th of November. And then there's also going to be one on the 25th of November, which will be on, which one's that one? How to research law firms.
Yeah.
Perfect. Yes.
With that age-old question of how do I actually tell firms apart when they all just sound the same and look the same? So it's a more sophisticated approach to research, which I've learned from my, decade working as a journalist. So if there is if anyone knows how to find information, it's me. The other thing I was going to mention was that a recorded version of this will be sent to you all. But, feel free if you want to, if you found this session helpful, do share your thoughts on LinkedIn. If you want to, I've noticed that lots of students are putting up key takeaways in PDF formats to share with fellow students. Feel free to do that. Cheeky Little Careers and Barbary are both quite new to this space, because Barbary's obviously literally just launched its SQE prep courses, even though it's a very, very well-known brand in the sort of US bar space. And our website is also in its infancy. So any support you can give us to keep up our good work, that would be really, really appreciated. And thank you very, very much for your time. And thank you, Anna, for your help running this as well.
Thank you so much, Husnara, for all that. Thank you. And see you all at the next event.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Have a nice afternoon.